The Magesterium. In the church, Christ gave the power to teach and to define doctrine to St. Peter and the apostles. And that has been passed down through each successive pope and through the bishops. That authority that they have to define doctrine, to define dogma, is called the Magesterium. From the word Magesterium, which means to teach. Magisterium, the Magisterium, the teaching power of the church, is infallible. That means it cannot err. But, and this is a big but certain conditions must be met for this to be true. Not everything that the Pope says, not everything that the bishop says is infallible. Only when it meets certain conditions. So, when is the Pope infallible? The conditions for when the Pope is infallible are these. First, he must speak ex cathedra. That means from the chair of Peter. He must speak as the head of the church. In the place of St. Peter, in the place of Christ. In other words, as the head of the church, with his authority. He must call upon his authority as head of the church. And he has to make this known. I mean, it's just not every time that he does it, it's just because he's the head. No, he has to say it. He has to make it known. Secondly, he's only infallible in matters of faith and morals that are held by the whole church. Nothing new or different. Anything that has been passed down from the apostles or from Christ. Anything concerning faith or morals in those matters, and in only those matters. Thirdly, he must manifest that it is his will that he is obliging this upon the whole church. And he has to do this clearly, declaring to those who hear him that what he is doing, that he's using his authority, and that he is declaring this. And lastly, that we have to, under pain of being put out of the church, that it's obligatory upon us to accept it and to believe it. He has to say that. So, in the history of the church, there have been very few popes that have used this power. The last one was Pius XII when he declared the dogma of the Assumption. And these are the words, and you will see in these words all those three conditions being carried out. By the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, of the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own authority, condition number one, he's calling upon his authority. Condition number two, he's going to say exactly what it is that we have to believe. We pronounce, declare, and define that the dogma was revealed by God, that the Immaculate Mother of God, the ever-Virgin Mary, after completing her course upon earth, was assumed to the glory of heaven, both body and soul. One line, very concise, very clear. This is what we have to believe. Every word in that is important. Therefore, and this is where the third point comes in, therefore, if anyone, which God forbid, should ever dare to deny this, or voluntarily call into doubt what has been defined by us, he shall realize that he has cut himself off entirely from the divine and Catholic faith. Third point, that if you don't follow this, you don't believe this, you don't accept this, you are no longer a Catholic. very clearly done. So, when are the bishops infallible? And that's called the extraordinary magisterium of the church, when the church uses this, the Pope calls upon this power. The ordinary magisterium of the church resides in the bishops, and that's when they're infallible. So what are the conditions? And they have conditions too. Well, first of all, when does this take place? When are they infallible? In two cases. First of all, when they solemnly proclaim a truth of faith in an ecumenical council, in union with the Pope has to approve their decision. They can't meet together as a group and define something without the Pope's permission. So when they meet as a group in a council, and with the Pope's permission and with the Pope's approval, and he approves what they say, that is infallible. Secondly, when they teach a truth belonging to the deposit of faith, this means when they're in their own diocese, and they're teaching their faithful because there's a question, maybe there's a heresy crops up, or there's a question of doctrine or something that's in their diocese, and they teach something belonging to the deposit of faith to explain this problem so that their people understand it. Then they are teaching infallibly. But that means, again, it has to belong to the deposit of faith. So they can't teach anything that the church already has upheld. They can't introduce anything new. They can only teach what the church has always taught in the way the church has always taught it. Generally, the second mode of infallibility is the norm. There have not been very many councils throughout the church. But in times of crisis, when there may be a question about doctrine, or when a bishop disagrees sometimes bishops disagree among themselves as to what a particular doctrine says, then the first mode of infallibility is used to resolve the crisis, and by calling a council to pass judgment. For example, and usually there's like a heresy crops up, and different bishops say, well, this is true, and others say, no, this is false, and so they have to call a council to decide exactly what is true and what is false, what is right, what is wrong, what do we actually believe, what don't we believe. And so, as with the Pope, this infallibility of the bishops has to meet certain conditions. The bishops, for the bishop's infallibility to apply. First condition, it has to be a truth touching faith or morals. The bishop just can't say, teach on something else, and that's infallible. No, it has to be concerning our religion, faith and morals. Secondly, the bishop has to teach authoritatively, as the bishop, and he has to say, like the Pope, as the bishop. As the bishop, as the father of this diocese, as the head of this diocese, this is what the people of my diocese must believe. Thirdly, it has to be universally unanimous, in a universally unanimous way. In other words, it's acceptable by everybody, not just this one bishop, but by all bishops everywhere. And fourthly, it has to be something that was divinely revealed to the apostles or necessary to safeguard the deposit of faith. Again, everything goes back to that, to the deposit of faith. What we have believed for 2,000 years, what was given to us by Christ and handed down through Peter and the apostles. Nothing new, nothing different. If those four conditions aren't met, there is no infallibility. This means that the bishops cannot introduce any new doctrines. They can only transmit truths that have been revealed by the apostles. Anything that we have always believed. And you say, well, what about the assumption? Well, that dogma was, the Pope put that forward. That was a new, no, it wasn't. It had been believed from the beginning. From the time then the apostles went to the tomb and found it empty of her body. It has, but it was never defined dogmatically. It was believed. It was part of the deposit, but because it was never, there were questions about it on one side or another. The church let you believe, well, she was assumed into heaven or she wasn't. We know that the tomb was empty. It was believed she was assumed into heaven. Considering that she was immaculate, there was no reason why she shouldn't not go body and soul into heaven like all other people who have who never committed original sin. So the Pope finally put a stop to the debate and said, this is what you have to believe. We dogmatically define it from now on. There's no question. The same with the Immaculate Conception when that was defined. It's always been believed. It was been passed down by the apostles, but it had never been. The church had never come down authoritatively upon it. This time, the church came down authoritatively upon it. As we mentioned, the crisis today, the church is also is not just a crisis of faith, but it's also a crisis of authority, the authority of bishops. Instead of defending the faith, bishops give free rein to the priests and professors who openly deny truths that we believe or have believed for 2,000 years. Moreover, they even encourage them. A good example is the German Synodal Way, which was approved, which approved a text calling homosexual acts not sinful and not intrinsically evil. That's a new stand. The church has never said that before. That's not part of the deposit of faith. The Pope also shares responsibility in this crisis. Both the Pope and the bishops encourage this crisis. First, by giving modernist theologians their support. Secondly, by defending opinions and acting in ways incompatible with the Catholic faith. When the Pope goes to Assisi, or the Pope and does this, pagan, Protestant, whatever you want to call it, the Pachamama thing with under Francis, those things are incompatible with the Catholic faith. And when they do those kind of things, they cause scandal, but they also cause confusion in this crisis. And there are plenty of examples of this. The book goes through each pope from John the 23rd to the present, and shows how each of them have contributed to this crisis. Thirdly, they erect obstacles to the faith of the obstacles to the work of the defenders of the faith. Those who are out there trying to uphold the Catholic faith, they put obstacles in their way. They make it difficult. They close down religious communities that want to live a religious life the way they have always lived a religious life, instead of putting new innovations in. They close them down, or they force them to accept superiors that they appoint. And again, you can look at the examples in the book from pages 28 to 38. So, are the popes, the bishops, and the people who follow them heretics? A heretic, as we explain again in Catechism, is one who expressly denies a dogma. Even though some of the popes have done and said many things that have seriously harmed the Church and the faith, and that could have been confirmed as heretics in their way of acting, it can't be proved that they knowingly and willingly denied the dogma. That they knowingly and willingly did it. To be a heretic, well, there's two types of heretics. There's what we call a material heretic and a formal heretic. A material heretic is one who contradicts the signal dogma, and usually he's not aware that he's doing it. He says he's confused. For example, you ask a child, how many persons are there in God? 2. Well, that's a heretical statement. There aren't. There are 3 persons in God. But the child doesn't know, and he thinks that there are 3. That there are 2 instead of 3. And so then you have to teach them what's correct. So these bishops, the Pope, when he acts like this, and others, people who follow them, rather they're not counted so much among the number of heretics as liberal Catholics, who on the one hand want to remain Catholic, but on the other desire to please the world and do everything that the world they can to accommodate it. They're not out and out heretics. They're trying to please the world, and they don't see anything wrong with that. And they can bring up plenty of things to back them up, back up their ideas. But again, they're still material heretics. But they're not formal heretics. We'll show you the difference. A formal heretic makes a very conscious and deliberate decision. He starts out maybe as a material heretic, and when his error is shown to him, he holds on to it. He doesn't renounce it. He's through pride or whatever, he deliberately refuses to recant. You have many Catholics today who are material heretics in the Novus Ordo because they're only repeating things that they've heard priests say. Everybody's going to heaven, or there is no such thing as hell, or one religion's as good as another. They're just repeating things that they heard a priest say, and because the priest said it, they accept it, and that's fine. But they think that's fine. That's being a material heretic. But now, if they say it and they're called, and the priest tells them, no, that's not correct. This is what the Church believes. And they still say, well, I think everybody is going to heaven. God's too merciful. God's too loving. He wouldn't have anybody go to hell. And they continue to hold on to that. Now they become a formal heretic. But they have to be shown that they are their heresy. And they have to be deliberately cling to it. A formal heretic makes a deliberate and conscious contradiction of the faith and adheres to it when they're shown that they're in error. This usually means that their heresy has been called into question, and they and their heresy have been examined, and they don't retract it. And that's the problem here, is that most of these heresies have not been called into question. Most of these heretics, their heresy has not been called into question. It hasn't been pointed out to them that they're wrong. Then there will be an explicit public declaration made that they are in error and, in fact, heretics. This is why we can't specifically or publicly call Novus Ordo Catholics or the like heretics. This must be done by the Church. However, we can point out their heretical beliefs to others, and we can try to keep them from following their example. When somebody says, there's no such thing as hell, you can say, oh, but the Church teaches this, and our Lord said this. And if they still won't listen to you, at least explain to the other people, make your case so that the other people listening can understand that this is not right. You say, ask them, show me where it says, where in Catholic doctrine it says, where in the Catechism does it say this? This is not the first time in church history that popes have espoused formal heresy. During the time of the Arian heresy crisis, which denied the divinity of Christ, Pope Liberius gave in to the pressure and excommunicated Bishop Athanasius and subscribed to an ambiguous profession of faith. Later, Pope Liberius, he was under threat. They threatened him with death. And later, when the threat had been lifted, and he reinstated Athanasius, and he, again, throughout his support of the Arian thing, I think they went back and forth several times. But, again, the Pope ascribed to it. He actually, promoted this heresy. And St. Athanasius, who was trying very hard to hold on to 2,000 years of Catholic doctrine, was the one who was being called a heretic. You can expect this to happen again. Remember, history repeats itself. Not too soon, you may be the one being accused of being a heretic because you're trying to hold on to 2,000 years of Christ's teaching. Pope Honorius was deceived by Sergius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, to accept a heresy of monothelitism. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Probably not. Which is belief that Christ had only one will, instead of both a human will and a divine will. Pope John the 22nd at first supported the false doctrine that the souls of the faithful departed don't have the beatific vision until after the general judgment. But it was pointed out to him his error, and he had the humility to allow himself to be corrected, and he retracted the error. Honorius died. It was pointed out to him that he was wrong, but Honorius died. He didn't retract it, and Honorius died, and it was for his successor to declare him heretical and to put everyone straight. Notice that in all these cases, the Pope remained in office because no formal charge of heresy was brought against them and publicly examined. In the case of Pope Honorius, he was condemned by his successor, while both Pope Liberius and John the 22nd retracted their stands later. The example of Pope Liberius and St. Athanasius shows that sometimes a lone bishop may be in the right in his principal stand against the Pope. Now, there's also been a question about canonization. In the past, canonization was considered infallible. That was up until 1983. The canonization since 1983 are no longer considered infallible. Why? Because there were changes in both the intention of the Pope in the canonization and also in the manner of deciding who was a saint. Prior to 1983, it was considered infallible. You had to jump through hoops to be named a saint. A certain number of miracles had to be performed. Your life had to be thoroughly examined, and there was an advocate appointed on the devil's side to show everything wrong that you may have done, which should deny you canonization. So that when the church stated that you were a saint and canonized, that was considered proof enough. So, but the process, as I say, has been changed. The number of miracles are no longer considered necessary. Simply living a good life or having done something great or good in your life now puts you up for canonization. I'm not sure whether they still have a devil's advocate, because in the case of some of the people that they put forward and named, he could have done a great deal of, pointed out a great number of things, but obviously didn't get done. Once the process was simplified to such an extent that it allowed doubt that the Pope, when he declared canonization, had the same intention as his predecessors. It's no longer considered that he has the intention of naming this person as a saint in the same way that his predecessors did, because now there's doubt about their position. He's saying that these people are in heaven, or is he saying that these are just good, holy people that we should follow their example, that they've done this good thing or that good thing, but their life has not been fully examined to show that they are, when they stand before Almighty God, the church no longer is judging them the same way as they probably would be judged when they stand before Almighty God. So the infallibility of canonization now remains doubtful. So now we come to the present Pope and heresy. Bergoglio has often espoused views that go contrary to the deposit of faith. This is usually done in an informal interview, often on an airplane, going from one place to another, where he could afterwards claim that his words were misinterpreted or confused or misunderstood. On a few matters, he's put his words into print, and cardinals and bishops have pointed out to him the problems with what he said. That what he said is not true. Doesn't go along with matters of faith the way we believe. And they've asked for explanations or clarifications, which were never given. Bergoglio has never gone back to clarify what he was saying. The most that he does is say, well, the Vatican Council says, Vatican Council number 2, Second Vatican Council said, this is in line with the Second Vatican Council's teaching. A good example of this is his Kazakhstan document, which he signed only a week or two ago, along with other ecumenical and political leaders, which states, we note that pluralism and differences in religion, skin color, gender, race, and language are expressions of the wisdom of God's will in creation. Religious diversity is permitted by God, and therefore, any coercion to a particular religion or religious doctrine is unacceptable. There's problems with this statement. And again, it was pointed out, but there's still no clarification. Bergoglio, in a later address, said, the Church believes that all humanity forms one community. This is so because all stem from one stock that God created to people the entire earth. In other words, Adam is the father of all of us. Therefore, we're all one. We're all part of mankind. That's true, but only as far as it goes. And because all share the same destiny, namely God, His providence, and evident goodness and saving designs extend to mankind. So in other words, because we all come from the same beginning with Adam, and we're all destined for the same end, heaven, therefore, one religion is as good as another. How you get there doesn't matter. This is not Catholic teaching. And when he was called on it, his answer was, "This is in line with the Second Vatican Council, with the teachings of the Second Vatican Council." That was his answer. The time is fast approaching that this will not be the case. Bergoglio has called a worldwide synod to examine issues pertaining to the family. Meetings were held in dioceses, and then nationally, and finally, a synod will take place next year with all the bishops meeting with the Pope. We can expect some rather radical and heretical ideas to come out of this synod. Things that you should keep in mind. First of all, the Church is not a democracy. We'll talk more about this later. We'll talk about religious liberty. But the Church is not a democracy. What the majority of the people want does not equate to doctrine. The doctrine, what we believe as Catholics, is not voted on by the members of the Church. It comes down whole and entire from Christ. Secondly, the deposit of faith has been handed down by the apostles, from Christ through the apostles. Bishops cannot institute any new doctrines. Say that 1,000 times before you go to bed tonight. Bishops cannot institute any new doctrines, but only transmit truths already revealed by the apostles. Nothing new. Keep the old. Thirdly, the synod is not infallible. Even though they meet, these bishops meet, it will not be, this is not an infallible council. This is a synod. And next time we'll talk about the Second Vatican Council, and you'll see what makes a council infallible. Remember, we've already gone over the conditions. Keep those in mind. So the synod is not infallible. It does not meet the criteria of infallibility. We can expect heresy to come out of the meeting. It's already being put forward on the national levels. Again, the German synod. We can also expect that after the synod, the Church will crack down on what they call backward-thinking people. That's us, traditional Catholics. We're backward-thinking. We want to hold on to an old-fashioned church, the church the way it was for the last 2,000 years. We're backward-thinking. And they may crack down on us to the extent that we will be ones who will be called heretics, like St. Athanasius, because we will be heretics in the new church. I would rather be a heretic in the new church than a heretic in the old church, because the new church is not my church. The old church is the Church of Jesus Christ, not the new church. The new church is the church of man. We will certainly be labeled hate mongers, rigid, primitive thinking, backwards thinking, and we will be open to persecution. This you can expect. This is what's coming. How do we know this? History repeats itself. So next time we'll look at the Second Vatican Council.